Hi everybody, welcome to this Assessment 3 Finalisation and Submission video. In this little video, I'll step you through everything you need to know about getting your project completed and delivering the required deliverables in the way we need to deliver them, labelled in the way they need to be labelled, essentially stepping you through the entire process. I'm using this PowerPoint presentation, which again will be available on the Blackboard side. I'll try and step through it fairly quickly because you'll always have this PowerPoint to come back to just to confirm and reaffirm everything you need to know. But towards keeping this video, I'll try and move it at pace. All right, so importantly, you'll soon come to recognise that it's multi-layered and very detailed, this assessment piece, thus creating this complex brief. And again, that's by no accident. Part of what we're looking to have you acknowledge and work with is a complex brief, as many of the productions we're tasked to make out in the real world do come with very complex requirements. So again, this is indeed complex by design. So just make sure, again, you're developing the skill of really understanding what it is we're asking you to deliver. And essentially, the good news is you've got two key resources to do that. First of all, the Assessment 3 Details document, which of course you'll find in the Assessment 3 folder. Make sure you are interrogating that again right throughout the post-production process, being very clear about what that document states in terms of what's required, how you're delivering it. And then this presentation and this video resource will also be a really key reminder about those details. So again, it's complex, and where you fail to deliver on what is required within this complex brief, we have no choice but to represent that, particularly in the meets task requirement criteria. So again, great time to revisit the CRA. Again, it's the last page of the Assessment 3 Details document to, again, get some real, very specific tips about what it is we're being asked to assess. All right, so let's dive in, get a sense of what we're asking for. Again, we've got access to these key central documents. And again, I strongly recommend particularly you read the Assessment 3 Details document. Often people have really delved into that at the start of the semester or heading into the Assessment 3 task, but often forgotten the details by the time we get at this back end where so many complex demands are being asked of you towards getting this production completed. So by all means, delve back into the Assessment 3 Details document. Everything else you need to know will be essentially contained in this presentation and the accompanying resources. Importantly, here's a reminder about the due dates, because essentially there are a number of deliverables, some of them required to be delivered online and some are required to be delivered in person. It's really important to know and be very clear on the difference between those, the details. All right, so, but as a general snapshot, we've got our online deliverables due at 11:59 on Wednesday, the 8th of June. That's during week 13. And then everybody will be participating in an assessment screening the following day on Thursday, the 9th of June. And again, whether you're on-campus learning mode or online learning mode, we'll all be gathering in a physical space and virtually at that one assessment screening. So again, some very particular details to wrap your head around in terms of what's delivered when, and I'm going to step you through it all now. But importantly, I would be putting these dates, these critical dates for this unit, in your diary or your calendars now, acknowledging it's, of course, very difficult for us to mark anything that comes in late without an appropriate extension request. Oh, and I think I just missed the last important one. Speak to me in advance of any problems or issues becoming last-minute crises. By all means, reach out to me or grab me in one of our remaining classes, and we'll get a plan in place. This is a snapshot, and again, you will be familiar with it because it's embedded in the Assessment 3 folder, acknowledging the number of deliverables and how we'll be looking to deliver them. And again, I won't go into too much detail here because we'll break each and every one of them down in detail here shortly. But you can see essentially with the Assessment 3 task, you're generating this creative narrative outcome. At some stage, your group will conceive that's as strong as it gets. Let's lock that off. And you'll need to generate a master copy of that film as a file. All right, and with that file, then you'll upload it to Vimeo. Again, there'll be some reminders about it being public and et cetera, et cetera. And that Vimeo, that working Vimeo URL, of course, is the first element of submission. You're going to take that URL and paste it into a submission point on the Blackboard site. And then along with that working URL, you're going to submit 4 pieces of post-project documentation. You can see them listed there up the top: a Vimeo form, a copyright clearance form, a final revised version of your risk plan document, and a peer review form. So those 5 elements make up the online deliverables due at 11:59 on Wednesday, the 8th of June, middle of week 13. As I mentioned, the following day you'll join us in an assessment screening, and the other 2 elements that are required will be delivered in person. One of them is a backup copy of your film. So somebody in your group, often your editor, will ensure they arrive with a copy of the film on a hard drive or a USB. And again, I'll remind you about particular requirements of that file, that of course it's playable, and it's a 1080p P4 progressive version of your film, either in a .mp4 or .mov file. And if you're using post-production software that allows you to make a choice around a codec, it'll be the H.264 codec option. So someone will turn up with a copy of that. We will farm that copy from you at the assessment screening. We'll take a copy of it. It will be a backup. And the other element that every group will turn up with is a physical copy of their production folder. Now that production folder will contain all of the essential paperwork, particularly the critical chain of title paperwork, standard release forms, location agreements, your volunteers and visitors forms, a copy of your risk plan, and all of the other associated documentations created by everybody throughout the process. Again, it should become a little Bible, essentially, an archive of what it took in all these roles to generate and create this cracking little narrative film. So again, these are delivered in person at the assessment screening at 9 a.m. on Thursday the 9th of June, and particularly with the production folder, as well as the drive and or the USB, you'll be walking away with both of those elements. Indeed, we'll farm a copy of the video, but you'll be taking your production folder home with you. It's not something you're going to submit. And again, it's acknowledging its importance as a historical kind of record of the project. You'll certainly leave with it. All right, I'll delve down in a little bit more detail as we look at each one. Let's start with the video file. As mentioned, there are particular requirements around the file, that ensuring it is a progressive and high definition format. Again, preferably in MP4 or .mov, and a reminder about the codec, H.264 codec. Now, some very particular requirements around how the finished film must be presented. And again, this is well worth highlighting, noting, and particularly for our post-production teams to note. What you're going to deliver in terms of this master file is a file that features 1 second of black, mute, that means no audio, of course. Then we'll either cut to or fade up from that black to your first image, whether it's a title or the first shot of your film. We'll experience the 3 to 5 minute live action film to what may be some representation of credits. Indeed, figuring out how the group or individuals, are being addressed in terms of a credit list or role will be important. But essentially, we'll experience the entire 5-minute film before going to 3 seconds of black, again in mute, so no audio accompanying it. And then we'll experience 5 seconds of a project ident board. And again, I'll give you some information that must be in that ident board in a moment. But we'll need 5 seconds of it before then either cutting or fading down to black, and 1 second of black, again without mute. So that's a very specific description of how we must experience the video file. Okay, so make sure again you understand it, working towards it. And we'll be reminding everybody about this in the last couple of weeks of post-production focused learning activities. And of course, depending on what program you're using, you'll need to achieve this in whatever the platform, post-production platform is. Here's that reminder about what must be in the ident board. Of course, give us the unit code, KBB 122 Screencrafts Narratives, semester and year, semester 1, 2022. Importantly, your group number. So you should know your group number now. The title of your film. You can see an example there. And then a very brief description of roles. Now, it may be that only individuals undertook individual roles in your production. It may be that the group found a way to share the role. We will need an indication, though, of who served in each role. Again, keep that contained and, hopefully all this information contained on the one page that we experienced for 5 seconds. And then in a really important piece of information, the duration. And you can see an example of the duration for an exact 5-minute film represented there. Hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. And being really mindful, of course, your finished films cannot be under 3 minutes and they can't be over 5 minutes. All right, so a representation of the film itself. Now, of course, keeping in mind durations refer to the program itself. So it's from the first moment we either cut to the first image or fade up from black to the first image. That is the start of your duration. It's not including the 1 second of black, and essentially your duration finishes when we leave your last shot, whether it be a credit roll or a shot from the film itself, down to black. Of course, that is the contained duration of the project. Okay, so again, make sure you're working specifically towards that really important element between 3 to 5 minutes. All right, so that'll be on your ident board. Make sure you understand that. Now, when you generate this final copy, again, whatever particular file format, MP4 or MOV, of course, it's important then to start engaging in really critical technical checks before you submit the whole thing. And this is one of the first ones, acknowledging we're checking it, of course, within the post-production software itself. But as soon as you create this master output, it's acknowledging just that process of generating it could create some sort of technical problem, what we call technical gremlins. And it's being on the lookout for them at the various processes and points where they can be experienced, and that if you don't double check that they're there, we can only mark you on what we find at the end of that Vimeo URL. All right, so critical reminder about that. I'll remind you again at a couple of points. Now, when you generate this master output, the one that turns up on your USB or hard drive to be physically submitted at the assessment screening, it's one of the first times we acknowledge each one of these deliverables has to have a very particular file title. All right, and this is the file title for your backup copy. And you can see it there, it's a representation of the unit, semester, year, your group, and then the title of the film. Make sure that file is expressed in that way. All right, and of course, once you've generated it, before you put it up to Vimeo, watch the master output. All right, just there it is on your desktop. Just click on it, and again, you'll have some sort of video software that will open it, whether it be QuickTime or VLC. You'll be able to watch that film, and of course, really importantly, watch it all the way through, that both the sound and the vision are outputted in a way that you expect it should be, and you're happy to be assessed on. First technical check with the master. All right, and of course, if there's any issues or problems or not quite sure how to do any of these outputting processes, of course, Tony will refer to them in the last couple of weeks of teaching and learning activity. But of course, be actually really proactive about asking about any issues or problems or bits of the process you're not quite sure about. Of course, we're more than happy to demonstrate any of these processes. Don't be shy, again, as the slide suggests. Okay, next. Of course, when you're ready to put this checked master file up on Vimeo, a couple of really important reminders. It must be public, which means anybody can see it. You are, in fact, distributing it to the world, right? Which means it cannot be unlisted or private. Keeping in mind that when we go to that link, we have to mark what we find at the end of that link. And again, I'll remind you in a very specific way why that is in a moment. So, of course, once you've got it up on Vimeo, that's another point for another critical technical check. Just the process of uploading it to Vimeo and Vimeo making it up there and being able to play it back just means you've got to sit there for another 3 to 5 minutes and watch it, listen to it, make sure it's, again, there in the way you absolutely want it to be, and it's the way you want to be assessed in terms of our experience of the film. Okay, so of course then having successfully done that check and being confident the film's up there, you're going to record and keep that URL, because it's going to be one of the first submission requirements, deliverables, as we generate all these other post-project documents. All right, so your URL first and ready to go. Now, here's that reminder. It's an acknowledgement that the assessment screening is actually conducted under exam conditions, which just means if we go to that and repeatedly go to it and there's a continuing problem with that link, again, we have no choice, because in fact it's exam conditions. We as assessors can only grade what we find at the end of that link, which just means, again, in terms of that technical check, being very sure that link is not only working, but it's working to a playable and perfect copy as you perceive the work being assessed. All right, so test. Just make sure it's there are no surprises. All right, the plan B really is this backup copy of your film, acknowledging if that was all we were relying on under exam conditions, and we didn't have a backup copy there, we wouldn't have anything else to play, right? So indeed, it points to the critical need to ensure the master file on your hard drive or USB is indeed playable as well, right? And if we're required to look at and assess that in the assessment screening, we do have it, and it's there again in the way you expect it to be. So again, some reminders about formats and file types and codecs. Make sure you apply all those elements of the brief. Next, to the post-project documents. All right, so with this working URL and a backup ready to submit on your hard drive USB, then we need these pieces of documentation. So you can see them listed there: Vimeo URL, of course that's to your playable version, and then these 4 pieces of paperwork: final revised risk plan, Vimeo form, copyright clearance, and peer review form. Now we're going to just very quickly talk about each. But importantly, with this risk plan, it's a document you've been working on both through pre-production and production, acknowledging you've been all out shooting, and indeed the plan may have varied and changed for all sorts of reasons, and as required, hopefully you've gone back to the document as soon as practicable and made notes about the nature of the change and any controls that ensured the changes remained low risk in terms of assessing the associated risk given the changes taken place. So indeed, there should be some information in the green column with each form. What I'm going to talk about now in terms of generating this final revised version of your risk plan means there's just a couple of other boxes in the form you'll be required to address. And of course, in keeping in mind, this is all industry practice, this idea of reflective analysis of what work about particularly critical process like risk planning is embedded in all industrial and professional practice. So again, this is something you're learning, because it will be something really central to your practice as you emerge out into the industry. So in terms of some of these boxes you'll now need to deal with, you'll know they're there because most of them are green. Okay, you've dealt with the green column as you shot. On the first page, and I'll show you what this looks like in a moment, you'll notice this list changes / variations box. And it's on the first page relative to how much information you provided in that first page. But really that's a summation. Having made all the changes and noted all the changes and controls that may need to have been applied during your shoot, it's coming back to that box and just making a summation of it. And there's probably some key things that were really key in terms of changes that took place. Maybe it was a variation of a location. Maybe a new volunteer had to come onto your set for whatever reason. But that's the box essentially where you create some points just in summation of the changes. Again, I'll show you exactly in a moment where it is. And there'll also be another box a little further down on that first page, which isn't green, and it's the post-project comments box. Now, again, I'll talk about that in a sec, but the final note down the bottom of the page there, speaking to modification history, of course acknowledges this will be a new iteration of this risk plan. It will be final, revised version of your risk plan. So, of course, the modification history box, once you've made all these additions and comments, must be addressed as well, acknowledging it'll be a new date. And you probably, in terms of what sections it covers, there'll be a very short list of these sections, right? You can probably list them there. I guess addressed by the unit coordinator, me, or JT, can be listed there. And you can just say what draft it is and the fact that it is the final revised risk plan. Okay. All right. So just to, before I jump off this, I'm just going to check. No, I'll go back and I will jump out of this and just show you the document just as a reminder. Okay, here it is. Now I'll go in a bit closer. So again, and this is an empty one. Of course, your existing iterations have been filled out with a lot of information by this stage. So this is the list changes and variation part of the document. Again, some point form notes about surmising the kind of changes or variations and controls you needed to put in place given what took place during your filming phase. There'll be no need to deal with this change approved medium or high risk because, again, that's a process that is extended in other uses of this form where a change while something's taking place requires, and it's perceived to be either medium or high, requires the activity to stop and for approval to be sought from someone like a unit coordinator. None of you engage in that process. So again, there's probably no need to deal with that box, just the summation in the list changes and variations. And this is the other box that every group will need to come back to, the post-project comments box. Now, what we'd expect to see in that box is just a few point form notes about what worked about your risk plan, what didn't work, and what you learnt out of working with it. What were the key learning outcomes of working with this particular risk plan on this particular project? Now, I strongly recommend this needs to be a group conversation. And I'd probably recommend as your project gets close towards the back end of the post-production process, inevitably your group's going to be being called together to have a look at these advanced versions of the cut. And you might even leave this process until the last time before submission that all the group gets together and looks at an advanced version, maybe providing some feedback to post-vision and sound crew members. But that's the time to have this conversation about, okay, we've got to just make some comments about the risk plan, what worked, what didn't, and what were the kind of key learning outcomes of working with it on this project. All right, just as, a handful of point form notes in this box meets the requirement. Okay, and just again to track us down through the document, if there have been changes around all sorts of things, maybe there was an electrical device all of a sudden that you didn't realise you'd need to use. You may have made a note during your shoot there. As I mentioned before, there might have been something like a new volunteer or visitor that you came to and as soon as possible made a note or two about them participating in some way. So again, we'd expect to see some point form notes in that green column acknowledging, rarely does a project and the production phase go as planned. And of course, this is the process. You just keep ensuring you cover yourself in terms of acknowledging that change, doing things safely, and ensuring the insurance coverage stays in place. I'm just going all the way down to the bottom of the document, again, just by way of reminding everybody, with this last and final iteration of your risk plan, the modification history box will need to be updated. Again, a new date covering those particular sections approved by me, and the fact that it is the final revised version. Again, do not miss the modification history. By this stage, you know how critically important it is. Okay, going back to our presentation. That's our first post-project document complete when that process is finished. And like everything else that's submittable, it will have its own naming convention. Right? So much like the master copy, backup copy of the film, you're going to follow the same convention: unit, semester, year, group number, and what it is, the final revised risk plan. Again, make sure you adhere to that naming convention. Once you've got that, you'll put it aside. It'll be ready to go. Another piece of documentation, the Vimeo form. Now, this is a form that actually provides some information to us as executive producers, but it'll be sort of information you'll need towards putting content up on a platform like Vimeo anyway. So I'm going to show you the form in a sec. And it's just a basic description of the project, helping to, in fact, position it and perhaps locate it given the nature of the content you'll provide. So jumped out of that. Let me go back. So again, you'll find this template along with the others also in the Assessment 3 folder. It's in the Assessment 3 Resources folder. You'll find these empty templates and just start filling them out as needed. All right, so review the video description format. The form itself gives you an exemplar, and you're just essentially going to copy and paste it and provide your own information about your group's project. There's an opportunity to include links, and I can't imagine at this level maybe anybody's engaged with generating some social media around this particular project as you create it. But if you did, feel free to include it. But what everybody should probably consider is think about a customized thumbnail, and why that's so important, of course, on platforms like Vimeo and YouTube. There's a lot of research that says, here's an example, 90% of all successful videos have custom thumbnails. So think about, is there a key image from the film that you can use as a thumbnail, or maybe even took still images during your production phase? Think about, can you provide a thumbnail? Now, if you do that, and I'm going to show you the form for it, this is it here, the Vimeo form, you'll note the template is a Word document, and again, if you provide that thumbnail, I'll put it down in this links section, but you'll need to utilize and keep it as a Word document for anybody to be able to farm that thumbnail off the document. Don't save it as a PDF, keep it as a Word document. So essentially all you're going to do is, this is the exemplar information it's looking for. You can just take that down to the box that will contain your information and fill it in. Okay. Now, again, I won't go to too much trouble, but just to keep to our exemplar, our film was called The Furry Angel for whatever reason. And then you're just going to, you're going to provide, the rest of the required information. Brief description might be your synopsis, and indeed a description of the fact that it's a 3 to 5 minute narrative live action short film. Unit, now also information about cast and crew. You'll just give us who did what in terms of the crew and the roles people undertook, and of course identify your on-screen talent. Then it asks for some key search words, things like QT, the unit code, what it actually is, narrative short film. And then particularly, some thematic concerns, or what kind of film it actually is in terms of an emotional response. It could be a comedy or it's funny. Provide those kind of information, and again, if you've got those either links or a thumbnail, please attach them under the links section. Okay, and again, keep it as a Word document. Going back to our presentation. All right, so once you've generated that form, similar naming convention, except this time it's the Vimeo form. Save that to your desktop, and again, you're building this collection of post-project documents. All right, and there's a note there at the bottom, actually going back to Vimeo and kind of replicating the information that's contained in this document. If you didn't actually do it when you uploaded the film, is often a good idea, particularly towards helping people find your particular film further down the track. Okay, next, copyright clearance form is another form. Now, its particular function is your group giving QUT the permission to use your film as a learning example on the Blackboard site. That's really the only function of this form. And probably and hopefully you really benefited from seeing other students' work. Now again, it's not that every project and every group's work will appear on Blackboard. It's just a cover-all in terms of identifying a really functional project, or in fact a project that may be useful in terms of pointing to some issues or problems. So we want every group to fill out this form. Again, I'll show you what it looks like in a sec. You can see the naming convention is maintained, except this is the copyright form. And you're going to save it to your desktop, and here's what it looks like. That's it there. And again, I'll just zoom in a bit. So it's asking for a student. Now, given you're all essentially producers of your project, in the sense you all equally own the copyright, just one student, one group member needs to fill this out, and they're filling it out on behalf of the group. So in fact, putting somebody's details, your name, for example, and I'll just say Fred Bloggs, our group member, and we might even give Fred a student number, and I was just writing on behalf of group 1A would be advisable. Just acknowledging, again, somebody is signing this on behalf of the group, acknowledging you're all producers, you all have the authority to do it, but we don't need every group member to sign this document, just one person on behalf of the group. So they'll complete it, fill out their name, insert the unit code and title, the full descriptor of the unit. And there's a section there if that person happens to be under 18. That's generally not the case, but if it is, there's a section there where a guardian, someone legally authorised to give permission on your behalf, can sign. And then importantly, make sure you come down and indicate, yes, I certify that I'm either over 18 and that you grant the licence under the terms and conditions, signature and date. Now, again, with all these documents that are submitted online and they are soft virtual copies, be really clear, you cannot provide just a digital version of your signature that isn't legally registered, which means just picking up a tool of some sort and just writing your name isn't a representation, a legally enforceable representation of your signature. So with some of these documents, it might be filling them out, printing them out, then doing the physical signature and then scanning them, or conversely, you might have a digital signature through something like DocuSign that is a legally authorized version of a digital signature. Okay, so it's either one or the other, print out, physically sign, or something like this legally registered version, but just don't use a tool and think that's okay. It's not actually legally enforceable unless it's one of those other two options. So keep that in mind. That is the copyright clearance form. Back to our presentation. Again, keep in mind the naming convention. And then finally, each group has to deal with our peer review document. And again, in every production unit, there's some sort of peer review mechanism. In this one, it's a very simple one in the sense of it sort of replicates what you may be all engaged with either in 101 or 117, but there's no obligation to keep the log. All right, so at the end of the process, it is just this one sheet where the group does negotiate, has a conversation, and a bit like dealing with the final revised risk plan, probably at that last viewing of the most advanced version of the film, we've got everyone together and almost all the work of the project is done. That's the time to obviously have this conversation about how we're dealing with peer review. Are we all happy to get the same mark given what the film is graded at? Or for whatever reason, and often really legitimate reasons, the workload wasn't completely even, and it would be only fair to represent a slight variation in terms of some group members getting maybe all of the available mark, and then maybe other group members in negotiation with the group representing maybe 80% or 70% of what the film is graded at. Now again, this requires an honest, mature conversation, an assessment of everybody's contribution, but it's the way in which we address the equity and the fairness of how people share grades. All right, and this is of course a really critical industry skill. Not only are you building the skill of assessing your own work and your own contribution to projects, of course it becomes really important to build skills to assess those of your collaborators and finding ways to get the best work out of the group, knowing at the end of the day it's the project that of course we need to make as strong and as effective as possible. All right, so there's a very simple kind of mechanism, the peer review form. There's a reminder here how you may have been advised to work with this document, in the sense it can be just a very simple calculation that it took X number of hours in total to create the finished film. And again, at this stage, without keeping a log, you're sort of doing probably a guesstimate on that. But then acknowledging if one particular person couldn't participate as much, coming to some sort of consensus about an appropriate percentage. right? And again, if it took X number of hours and somebody participated for half or a third of that, of course, it becomes a simple case of applying a percentage. That is one way. Now, keeping in mind there are plenty of opportunities in post-production as any project moves through post to find workload, supporting the editor or post-sound person, or in fact taking one of those roles themselves. So lots of opportunity to ensure everybody contributes and everyone essentially gets the same mark, but it will need to be a conversation every group has. If any group has an issue coming to a consensus about that, it's okay to submit this form and just note on it there was not yet agreement about it. If that is the case, then what has to happen after the assessment screening is the group has to come into a meeting with me as the unit coordinator. We sort of unpack the differences of opinion and what actually transpired on the film, and then ultimately it's my determination, having heard everybody's case. And of course, my ruling stands, unfortunately. All right, so again, it's in your best interest sort of to work out these professional and mature approaches and conversations, have them, and submit a negotiated agreement. All right, like everything else, there's a reminder about how this file itself has to be titled. In this case, it's the peer review form. Again, make sure you adhere to that convention. And just to, again, show you what this form looks like, it'll look familiar because, again, it's what everybody used in a previous production unit. In this case, just noting the group number. Yes, we're all getting the same mark in terms of what the film is graded at, or no, we're not. You'll circle one of those. And then we need a name printed and then a signature of every group member. Now, if the answer is yes, you don't have to put a percentage. If the answer is yes, everyone's getting 100% of what the film is graded at. But if the answer is no, it's, again, print your name, a signature, and then we should see percentages. Now, those percentages should be what everybody in the group thinks is a fair representation of the participation, right? It's the negotiated percentage. All right, so that is your peer review form. Okay, getting there. Now, the submission process, again, we know the deadlines. Essentially, these online deliverables are the Vimeo URL and these 4 forms. And keeping in mind, when the group submits these elements, only one student on behalf of the group needs to submit them. Not everybody submits all these things, right? It's just one person on behalf of the group. All right, and so this sort of steps you through. Again, you'll see all this information on the Blackboard site. I won't need to cover it here. You'll come back and just ensure you understand it. Keep in mind, you'll copy and paste the submission, the URL submission into a text window, and then you'll attach the 4 required pieces of post-project documentation. Right, and then click submit. That will be done on behalf of the group. And having submitted those 5 online elements by 11:59 on Wednesday, the 8th of June, then you can turn your attention to ensuring you've got the 2 elements to deliver in person at the assessment screening the following day. So let's have a look at those. Again, the backup file and the production folder. Again, you can spend some time bearing down into those descriptors, but essentially a reminder that backup file needs that naming convention. Have it on a hard drive or a USB. Again, you'll take either of those options, your hard drive and USB, home with you. We will just take a copy off of one of those hard drives, but we need the file to be named in this same naming convention. A reminder about the file types and codecs and resolutions. And of course, it needs to be the same file that exists up on Vimeo. You're going to use the same file for your upload to Vimeo, obviously. All right, and then in terms of the production folder, again, we should see all the necessary critical pre-production and production paperwork you've been building along the way. Now, beyond that, it can include all sorts of things like the directorial pre-visualization material, shot lists and marked up scripts and again, cast agreements. There might be camera plots. There might be also storyboards. All sorts of pre-visualization developed by both the director and perhaps the camera and lighting crew. Sound sheets, continuity sheets. You by now know the extensive list of production and pre and post production paperwork that can be generated in a little film like this. So this really should become a physical Bible of all that production paperwork. And I will remind you at the assessment screening, it is then a really great practice that everybody at some stage gets access to a copy of this. Now, probably what it means in reality after the fact, that someone will spend some time just scanning everything and you make a soft copy of this document. I'll remind you at that time it's really important to be mindful of privacy, and that any personal information, particularly around cast and crew agreements, there might be, of course, things like crew medical forms. They specifically won't be in any physical or soft copy generated to be distributed amongst the crew. In fact, spending a little bit of time just ensuring privacy is adhered to. But it will become a really great little resource, and you often want to collect versions of these on all the little projects, and you'll be surprised how useful they become as resources as you move from one project to the next. Okay, that you had a problem and on a previous project, similar to the one you're experiencing now, and going back and looking at that little production Bible to find contacts or solutions to the problems you found on previous projects just makes these really valuable. So I strongly suggest you get in the habit of ensuring on each production this kind of thing gets generated and it becomes something you can access and take away from the project. But keeping in mind that privacy element. All right, so often this will be the production manager coming with this folder. Again, I'll remind you about all this sort of stuff. We will just want to see it. We'll just want to interrogate some of the paperwork by viewing it within the assessment session, and then importantly, I'll hand it straight back to you. You'll be able to take it away with you. But we do need to see this paperwork. Okay, so make sure you turn up with your production folder as containing as exhaustive amount of paperwork as the production generated. All right, and so there's again a snapshot. You'll find this snapshot on the Blackboard site. Just make sure you are double checking with it leading up to the submission date and time, that you know exactly when every element is due and how it's to be delivered. Okay, again, complex brief, making sure you understand everything. All right, just to wrap up some final information, because it isn't complex and multi-layered, it means don't leave it to the last minute. In fact, as the editor and then particularly the post-sound people take over, working that aspect of the project, other group members can particularly be dealing with the post-project documents. There's no reason why you can't, be sharing and delegating that workload and having it sitting there ready to submit. So it just means, because there's so much probably just to get organised, don't leave it to the last minute. And of course, that's partly acknowledging that that's how the real world works. You can't leave everything. You've got to, in fact, plan for there to be issues or roadblocks, whether they be technical or getting the right signature on the right piece of documentation before something is due. Acknowledging, out in the real world, these deliverable deadlines often are completely immovable. So you're training yourself to ensure you meet the brief and you meet the deadline with all required elements. All right, so there's a final reminder. Due dates for online elements, 11:59, Wednesday the 8th of June, and the assessment screening the following day on Thursday the 9th at 9 o'clock. And again, you'll see a lot of information flow out over the last couple of weeks, reminding you about where, when, and how both the on-campus learning mode and online learning modes will be connecting with this assessment screening in week 13. So keep an eye out for that information. All right, that's all our information. Again, very specific. Make sure you either print out this presentation or come back to the soft copy of the detail and use it in concert with your Assessment 3 details document. Between each document, it will absolutely prescribe both the process you need to move through and the way in which you're going to prepare and then submit everything. So all the details there. Good luck. I look forward to seeing both your films and all the associated assessment details submitted in the coming weeks, and celebrating the fruits of all your hard work across the semester. See you soon.